everybody. Everybody having a good time at the festival? Yes. My feeling is the past 5 years, it feels like we were together last year. And I think that it's been a great weekend so far. I'm Jerry Katz with the Boston Bluegrass Union, and you've probably wandered around the festival and seen old Joe Val and BBU flyers, and I take to heart the idea that this music is a living thing with a wonderful history, and we need to celebrate that history. So we're here today for a wonderful panel about bluegrass in Boston and throughout the region. I've been fortunate to be able to dig back and locate some old Joe Val and Charles River Valley Boys and Don Stover pictures, so you'll see those up here. But I'm really looking forward to hearing this panel, and please give them your attention, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Taylor, and have a great time, and we'll see you over the course of the weekend.
Thank you so much, Jerry, and to everyone else at the BBU who has made this incredible weekend happen. So I'm going to just give a little bit of an introduction to the general history that each of the panelists are going to be talking about. Before I get into that, I want to share just a little tiny bit about how I got into studying this, which is that I moved here to Boston in 2021. I'm an ethnomusicologist, a music historian, and I study music communities. I'm more focused on things that are happening now than being a historian per se. But when I came here to Boston and I started to hear the music that was happening here today, the things that are going on, going to jams at Lilly Pease, going to events here at this hotel in the interim between the Joe Val's festivals, going to old-time jams at the Burren, I started to realize there must be some stories here. I'd never lived in Boston. I'm originally from Montana. And when I heard this music that was happening here and started to listen to recordings of bands who'd been playing here for 3/4 of a century, I realized, wow, there's not just some stories behind this music scene, there is a whole history. And the musical community that we're all getting to participate in and enjoy this weekend grows out of that amazing history. So I want to talk just a little tiny bit, some basic historical overview before I pass well, you each have a mic already, so I'm not really passing any mics, but the metaphorical mic over to each of the amazing panelists today. As we all know, bluegrass is, in its origins, a Southern music. When I tell people around the country that I'm studying and writing about bluegrass in Boston, I am often met with raised eyebrows until I tell them the people that I'm writing about. Bluegrass music, for most of a century, has ended up in all sorts of surprising places, and it's been embraced by all sorts of folks. The beginning of the story that leads to all of this, as far as I'm concerned, starts in 1952, when Everett and B. Lilly, along with their bandmate Don Stover and the bandmates Tex Logan, moved here from West Virginia. A lot of people know about migrations that occurred in the United States in the early parts of the 20th century, but outside of bluegrass, a lot of folks don't realize how many white Southern folks moved out of particularly Appalachia, also places like Oklahoma where the Dust Bowl happened. And as they moved to different places, carried their music with them, right? We end up with incredible country music in Bakersfield, California. Loretta Lynn gets her start singing in honky-tonks for loggers in Washington State. The Osborne brothers get their start in Dayton, Ohio, and Hazel Dickens, who, if you stay in this room after this panel, got her start in Baltimore. The Lillys and Logan played together before they came up here. They were on the West Virginia country music circuit and had a daily radio show on WWVA Jamboree in Wheeling in the late 40s. Then Logan came up here to enroll in the engineering program at MIT. And Everett went to tour as the mandolinist for a pretty good band, Flatt and Scruggs. In Boston, when they all landed, the quartet, then known as the Confederate Mountaineers, scraped out a living playing bluegrass at some of the seediest bars and clubs in town, particularly the famous or infamous Hillbilly Ranch in the combat zone of downtown Boston. When we were putting together this panel, I was communicating a bit with Jim about this era. And he mentioned that when he and Bill filled in at the Hillbilly Ranch when the Lillys and Stover were on a vacation, he afterwards talked with Everett and said, gosh, it was hard work doing this. An hour on, half an hour off, from 7 to 1 in the morning, 7 days a week, playing mostly to people who didn't really care what we were doing. And Everett said, well, it sure beats working in the mines. That's where the Lillys were coming from, right? And I think that exchange is really at so much of the core of this story. People moved here looking for a better life and started something that we all still get to enjoy today. Part of what made this happen in Boston specifically was that just a few years after that, the folk revival takes off. Lilly Brothers and Don Stover started their time here playing for sailors, truckers, and barflies, but soon enough, they spotted nervous Harvard students sitting in corners of the Hillbilly Ranch, hoping to hear authentic Southern music. As Boston grew into an important hub for the early folk revival. This brought new opportunities for the Lillys and Stover, who started playing at folk venues like the famed Club 47, as well as college campuses in Cambridge and around the Boston area. The very genesis of my work studying these specific acts, when I was teaching at Brandeis, I saw a poster for the 1963 Brandeis Folk Festival. There was some established acts there, like Pete Seeger, Gene Ritchie. There was a young guy who was right about to take off next year. His name was Bob Dylan. And there were the Lilly Brothers and Don Stover and the Charles River Valley Boys. And I went, okay, there's got to be a story here. In the 1960s and 70s, a number of bluegrass acts formed in the Boston area, including the Charles River Valley Boys, which was Joe Val's first professional group. Their 1966 album, Beetle Country. Anyone heard Beetle Country? Oh gosh, I should be playing this. It was all bluegrass covers of Beatles songs and absolutely stellar. There was the duo of Bill Keith and Jim Rooney. There were also several other important acts and artists in the greater New England area. Northern Lights would come about a decade later. Alex's father, Sandy MacLeod, would play with Bob French and Herb Applin in the early 60s. In 1976, a group of people, many of whom are here today, formed the Boston Bluegrass Union, which would be the lifeblood for this scene. But there was one person who, for a lot of folks, stood out as a really special performer and a person who was absolutely from here. Joe Valiente, who Peter Rowan described as the voice of bluegrass in New England. He was born close by in Everett, Massachusetts, to an Italian immigrant family. Joe Val, as he's now known to all of us, grew up poor, never went to college. He wasn't your typical folk revival guy. But as a young man, he frequented the Hillbilly Ranch and eventually started performing with the Lillys and Stover. He ended up playing with lots of other bands. I mentioned the Charles River Valley Boys. But his touring was limited by his day job as a typewriter repairman. In 1970, he formed Joe Val and the New England Bluegrass Boys. Several members of that band are here this weekend. You can hear them playing on stages or even catch a chance to pick with them in the halls. That same year, Rounder Records was formed in Somerville, partly by our very own Bill Nowlin. Rounder would go on to become one of the premier roots music labels. Its first bluegrass release was Joe Val's One Morning in May. Joe Val and the New England Bluegrass Boys worked the Northeastern Circuit hard. Some of their early jobs were at strip clubs, where they would play alternating 30-minute sets for as many as 12 hours. But soon they were playing festivals and even touring Europe. When I visited with Eric Levinson, the band's longtime bassist, he mentioned that it was pretty hard to get into southern venues and festivals at that time as a New England act. But eventually, the group caught the ear of Bill Monroe, who invited them to play his bluegrass festival in Bean Blossom in Indiana in 1963. It's hard to overstate the importance of this invitation and the echoes in terms of legitimizing the bluegrass scene here that would grow into the bluegrass tradition here. As many of us know, just as Joe made the decision to tour full-time, he was diagnosed with lymphoma. His bandmates described this as almost certainly caused by constant exposure to carcinogenic chemicals used to clean typewriters. Joe was forced to stop performing in 1984 and had passed by 1985. Like legendary figures in American folk music like John Henry, as well as countless other coal miners and other working class laborers, Joe's life and his art were cut short by dangerous working conditions. In 1986, Joe's friends organized a Memorial Joe Val Day in celebration of his life in Waltham, Massachusetts, where he had long called home. This became an annual event in the 1990s, and the Boston Bluegrass Union expanded it into the Joe Val Bluegrass Festival, which became one of the top bluegrass festivals in the U.S. till COVID-19 ended its 34-year run, but now we're back. Yes. So with that, I'm so happy to have such a stellar group of panelists. First, we're going to be hearing from Alex MacLeod, who is a singer, songwriter, and MC. He's been involved in bluegrass music for as long as he can remember. While his first appearance picking bluegrass wasn't until the late 1980s, he grew up surrounded by the music thanks to his dad, who I mentioned, Sandy MacLeod, a Massachusetts native. Alex is a founding member and lead singer of the stellar band, the Rock Hearts. Make sure you hear them playing today, who I consider one of the top traditional bluegrass bands in the Northeast. He's currently writing a book on the history of bluegrass in New England, drawing from extensive interviews. In addition to his work in bluegrass, he's a counselor, a father, and a kids rugby coach. Alex MacLeod.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to throw a big beach ball out to all you baseball players so you get on base your first swing here. Who was Uncle Pen Vandiver? Raise your hand if you know who Uncle Pen was. All right. Who was Arnold Schultz? You know who Arnold Schultz was? Okay, we're about 25%. So this is great. So, who was Bill Monroe? Okay, there we go. Well, you know, Uncle Pen and Arnold Schultz had a huge influence on a young Bill Monroe. His Uncle Pen was this Kentucky old-time fiddle player who really heavily influenced Bill's music sense. And Arnold Schultz was a black blues musician. And Bill, of course, fused those two forms of music as well as gospel to form what we call today bluegrass. So very well. Good job, everyone. Now, it gets a little harder. Who was Smith Hammett? All you Smith Hammett fans out there. Oh, okay. How about Mac Woolbright? Any Mac Woolbright fans? Smith Hammett. Well, let me ask you this. Do y'all know who Snuffy Jenkins is? All right, there's a few of you. There we go. Okay. And who was Earl Scruggs? Smith Hammett was a local banjo player from out in western North Carolina where Earl Scruggs was from, born in late 1800s. And he played a three-finger style banjo long before a young Earl Scruggs, who was born in 1924, came along. Earl, as some of you may know or may not, Earl's dad was a banjo player. He had a 5-string open-back banjo, and so Earl started playing that. I think it was Earl's dad died when he was about 4 or 5, but continued to play that banjo and started emulating this guy, Hammett Smith, when he was about 6 years old, trying to get that 3-finger roll thing down. He was only 10 years old when Snuffy Jenkins was one of the first credited with playing that 3-finger roll style of banjo on the radio. In 1934. And Mac Woolbright was a blind finger-picking banjo player that lived around where Earl lived. And so, again, if you're not picking up on the trend here, for all of these folks in bluegrass music, especially the musicians, there was someone that came before them, influenced them, inspired them, and that's really what piques my curiosity, is what came before these A-listers that we all admire. Who is Jim Rooney? I got to hang out with Jim Rooney a couple times, and I have to say he's just been such an inspiration for me, both as a musician, as an author, because he too, at just a very young age, was turned on to this bluegrass music down at Symphony Hall. I'm not going to steal any of his thunder here, but another young person that heard that sound, that had that aha moment that blew off their socks, and they said, I've got to learn more about that. How about, for local New Englanders, how about Bill Moody? Who's Bill Moody? Or Jim Moody. So back in the early 60s, Bill Moody was a transplant from West Virginia, not a bluegrass musician, although he arrived in Rhode Island with a little handmade cigar box banjo. But he loved the music. So late 50s, early 60s, he would host jams at his house. And he would promote local music in southern Rhode Island and Rhode Island. And along about 65, 67, this tall, lanky bass player by the name of Bill Rawlins came over to Bill's house and started playing some music. Well, Bill had a friend from the same town who was a couple years younger who was playing sock hop music and electric guitar. And he heard Mike Seeger play banjo, and he goes, wow, that's pretty cool. I like that. And then he heard Earl Scruggs, and it blew his mind. And so he showed up at this jam, and he walked into Bill Moody's house, and he says, I want to play banjo. And Bill looked at him and said, but you're a really great high tenor singer. You should really play mandolin. There's one on the chair right there. Go pick it up. Come join us. That fellow was Jimmy Goodrow. So when you think about that rustic mentor, that person in all of our lives as musicians that piqued our interest, showed us that first chord, showed us the G run. I mean, that blew my mind when I was 16 and my dad taught me that. And so, as Taylor was saying, my dad, we're from Concord, Massachusetts originally, and he was turned on to bluegrass music in the late 50s by hearing, the Lilly brothers, and he started playing mandolin with Bob French and Herb Applin. He was 1962. He played his first show there, but then he joined the military in about 63, and so my family moved around the world, and it was interesting because everywhere we went, Dad always found people to pick with. So in the early 70s, we moved to we moved to District Heights, Maryland, which if you're from Maryland, back in the early 70s, District Heights, Maryland was not the greatest place to live. And so my family moved up to Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And my dad hooked up with a band. My mom started clogging. And before you know it, my sister and I were clogging with the band as well. We were the cute little kids that would go out in front of the troop, right? They would go on the road, and Roy Clark was from that area. And Roy Clark's parents used to babysit my sister and I. And he would, so I grew up hearing stories about, the Lilly brothers and Don Stover and Tex Logan and Richie Brown and Davy Dillon and all these great, Bob and Sam Tidwell, all these folks that he played music with. And I heard more stories about them than my own families when we were living, in other parts of the world. And, and so when Herb Applin passed away a couple of years ago, that really shook me. Because I never had the chance to sit down with him, right? Pick his brain, hear stories. And I thought, what a tragic loss. And then I started thinking, well, there's got to be more stories about New England bluegrass music. And I looked around, but there really wasn't. There wasn't stories about bluegrass in Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire. Boston bluegrass was so vibrant. I mean, I think it was Sonny Osborne that said, Boston, Massachusetts is one of the best honky-tonk places in the whole world. It was real, it was genuine. And so for the last couple of years, this endeavor that I kind of jumped in on was really about unpacking that history of bluegrass music from the folks that were there. I wanted to hear firsthand from guys like Jim Rooney or Bruce Stockwell or Dave Kippeth or Richie Brown or Davy Dillon or Eric Levinson, people who were there that saw this evolution occur, and pick their brain about who were their inspirations. And, clearly, my dad was my inspiration, right? And so in some ways, this project is a great kind of connection with him. But at the same time, it's just a story that I think needs to be told because of its rich history. And so my approach to this has been interviewing individuals, and I get to sit down with them for about an hour and pick their brains. And it's been just one of the most impactful experiences of my life the last couple of years doing this, and I look forward to continuing it. And so certainly if you know folks that were there, please have them get in touch with me. I'd love to talk with them, and just, it's about family, it's about community. I see so many folks here today that have been a part of that, both inspirations and friends and contemporaries. Mr. Gibson's over there. Dudley, I remember seeing when I was 14 at the Chestnut Lodge in Colchester, Connecticut. Just really cool stuff, So in any case, so if you know someone that was there, have them reach out to me. I'd love to talk with them. And I'm just honored to be up here with Bill and Jim and thank them for all of their contributions to the history of bluegrass music in New England. So I'm honored to be up here, fellas, and thank you, Taylor, for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm so excited to see this work continue to grow and all the amazing stories you're getting. Next, I'd like to introduce Bill Nowlin, one of the co-founders of Rounder Records. Rounder Records, for those of you who, probably most of you know, but for those of you who don't, is an absolutely essential label in terms of getting high-quality bluegrass music in the hands of folks all around the United States. And that includes some of the artists that we've already heard mentioned, like Joe Val, Hazel Dickens. All three Rounder founders were involved in the BBU from the start. And I think that this is something that we're going to hear about a lot, both in this panel, but just all weekend. The Boston Bluegrass Union has been this hub and a just moving force for this music in the whole region now for 50 years. All three of the founders, along with John Virant, currently run Down the Road Records based in Cambridge. Bill still listens to Hillbilly at Harvard, the radio show, every Saturday morning that he's home. He is a prolific author on a range of topics, including baseball, politics, and of course, music. I spend a lot of time around authors. I think you're the first person that when I asked you, so how many books have you written, couldn't quite recall how many it was. That's a different level of prolific, ladies and gentlemen. One of his most recent projects is a collaboration with the BBU's very own Jerry Katz, documenting the history of the Boston Bluegrass Union. And that's what Bill is going to be sharing with us today. So let's welcome Bill Nowlin.
Thank you. I wanted to start off by mentioning Boston area Friends of Bluegrass and Old Time Country Music, kind of a long-named organization. Used to call it BAF for some reason. But that was the first organization of bluegrass in the area here, formed by Nancy Talbot, who is still with us, but in a senior home in Cambridge. Her sister is going to be here later today, but not able to make this particular event. She's going to show up later this afternoon. But Boston Area Friends, which Nancy and Fred Bartenstein started in 1969. Their first concert was in December, and Joe Val was on that show at the Harvard Freshman Union, as were the Lilly Brothers and Don Stover and the Spark Gap Wonder Boys. Two of those are among the first three albums that Rounder ever put out. Our first albums were in 1970, and then the third one was Joe Val in 1971. We had become, Ken and I were freshman roommates at Tufts University. I was born in Boston, so I have not gone far in life. And I went to Tufts, and here we were roommates. We first got interested in bluegrass because of a record that a friend of Ken's had given him by the Greenbrier Boys. And they were kind of a urban group, New York City, basically. And I think that's what captured us first, because Ken grew up in the suburbs of New York. I grew up in Lexington for the most part, which partly explains my history. For 7 years, I was a guide at the Battle Green in Lexington all through high school and college, and just went to the 250th anniversary last year, getting up at 3 a.m. to volunteer with folks with disabilities that were coming to the event. But Ken and I, it was something about they had the City Billy appeal that kind of was humorous. Hillbilly music to us had a humorous aspect because we were at a distance from it. We didn't grow up with it, and we became to appreciate it in many dimensions. But the first one was kind of a different approach. The first concert I ever went to was Ray Charles. The first record I ever bought was Elvis Presley. This is when you had small records, so I grew up. I saw the Beatles and the Rolling Stones as they came through town, and Ken and I went to a Bob Dylan concert at Tufts. He never showed up because he claims he got the wrong information later, but Peter, Paul, and Mary were there. And we got very involved in the folk scene. Jim used to help run the Club 47, and this was 1963 that we first went to our first concert that Manny Greenhill put on at, it was the Greenbrier Boys, oddly enough. That got us involved, and then Ken found out that you could put up posters on the Tufts campus and get free admission to Folklore Productions shows. So that's how we kind of got involved with the business aspect of stuff, doing promotion and getting free admission. I got free admission here to the this festival. I'll be working the ticket stand at 4 o'clock this afternoon. But the whole thing became, Rounders started as kind of a hobby. We would just never expected to be a business. We were all graduate students. Well, we became graduate students. We all college students and thought we were going to have academic careers. In fact, I did teach college for 12 years before I realized how much it was getting in the way of Rounder. So I retired in 1982. It's hard to believe that I'm 51 years old and I helped found this organization. And yeah. But Boston Area Friends was first. They put on some wonderful shows. There is a history that I helped write that's 59 pages on the BBU website. I think there's some printed copies around if you can find them here. Some wonderful photographs that have been pulled together, and I tried to just write a history of the BBU. The BBU succeeded Boston Area Friends because Nancy was she was a very dedicated person, but she also had her own way of doing things. And some people, including Joe Val, who called her the Dragon Lady, thought she was a little bit too domineering in some sense. I think, from talking to her sister and other people who knew her very well, she was never in it for the money. She just had her own way of doing things, and she wasn't welcoming. She featured groups from the South more than groups from here. And one of the reasons that BBU grew up and is celebrating its 50th anniversary later this year is because local groups weren't getting enough attention. There was two reasons, basically. Was aside from Nancy's personality, that was deemed negative by some folks. I used to volunteer doing the mailings at her second-floor apartment on Putnam Avenue in Cambridge, so used to help those shows for the first several years. But community was a big thing, and you see it with BBU. They're picking parties, jam sessions. It's a major feature of BBU is building community through volunteerism and welcoming younger people into the music as well. And that just BBU had a different approach than Boston Area Friends, and it just matured over time. Ken and Marion, after he graduated, he went to Cornell, and he met Marion at one point in Maine, and she moved out to live with him at that point in Ithaca. They started Ithaca Area Friends of Bluegrass. So it was an organization that did inspire people. The first BBU show was October 3rd, 1976, featuring Joe Val and the New England Bluegrass Boys at the First Church Congregational in Cambridge at the corner of Mason and Garden Streets, the church with the rooster on top. It's still there. I wish they'd try to, it's a Korean church of some form right now. I don't live a few blocks away, but it'd be fun to have another show there. The price was $3 for admission to that. Some of those first. No, that was $2.50. It was $3 at Nancy's show. I did a lot of research into the background of the music, and I found the Articles of Incorporation. The attorney that helped set it up is still a friend, Mike Milford. He lives not far away in Cambridge. Among those signing the first announcement, when BBU announced itself, many of them are here today. The names I wrote down are there's a list of about a dozen people. Almost all of them I was able to get in touch with in researching this history. Some of them I was not, from one reason or another, but Richie Brown, Margaret Gertis, Marion Layton, who became Marion Layton Levy, Eric Levinson, Nancy's sister, Bar, Ray Mariozzi, Steve Watt, Joe Val himself, and Stan Zdonek, who was with us until only recently, as I think everybody knows. The second show was Ted Lundy, Bob Paisley, and the Southern Mountain Boys. We seem to have seen some Lundys and some Paisleys just last night, which was a very enjoyable show that I hope most of you were able to catch. Some of the folks signing the initial papers, Stan was the first president. Ken Shea, Susan Bartholomew, those were the three officers that signed the incorporation papers. The official address was Richie Brown's place in Cambridge. So there are many people that still go back all those 50 years and so forth. I think that the two organizations could have survived, theoretically, could have survived together, with Nancy maybe bringing in bigger acts from the South and BBU focusing more on local bands and the community aspect, but and the developing young people in the thing through the kids, things such as the Kids Academy now and other programs for young people and so forth. There was a conflict when BBU signed J.D. Crowe in March '79, so they were together for 3 years, overlap there. But Nancy put some pressure on J.D. and he decided not to honor his contract with Nancy, and that caused a split and so forth. I think Eric Levinson, I quoted him in the history here, he said that BBU was a whole different thing. That's the way he put it, from the basically the standard kinds of shows that Nancy was putting on. And here we are today, 50 years later, after BBU's signing. It's just been quite a journey. I mean, we used to listen to Hillbilly at Harvard, as I did again this morning, 9 to 11 today. And then I got out of the car at 11 o'clock and came in here. And I plan to be listening next Saturday as well. But it's just a tradition that goes, in my case, back to the early 60s. Ken and I used to go to Club 47 a couple times a week, stand in line, and it was always just so much fun. It was such a knowledgeable audience. You'd stand in line, and people would be talking about, the Osmond Brothers, the third cut on side B, and people knew what you were talking about. It was just a real community of folk music lovers at the time. We just became very immersed in it. Clearly, Ken and I and Marion started the company with our first albums in 1970, and that came out of a Lilly Brothers show that we never have released. We recorded them. We talked to County Records. We talked to Rebel Records. Said we'd like to get a record of the Lilly Brothers because we had the Folkways one that had come out many years earlier. And they said, "Well, make the tapes, and we'll talk about it." And Everett's son died. Giles died just a few days beforehand, and it was a very sad show. Not the kind of show you'd really want to memorialize in a recording. They weren't at their best, and the spirit. It was a very sad concert. So that we do have the tapes, but that concert has never come out. We just fell in love with the music. Ken and I hitchhiked down to Galax from Boston back in the days when you could hitchhike. Hitchhiked to Union Grove to see the Fiddlers Convention that was memorialized on one of those Folkways albums that I think we first heard at the Club 47 playing on the sound system there, and then at Briggs & Briggs, which is a local music store in Cambridge at the time. Many of these places aren't around anymore, but Club 47 continues as Passim, and I hope many of you know that and frequent it from time to time. But Jim used to help bring a lot of these bands to town, and we, of course, saw the Charles River Valley Boys back in those days, and it's wonderful to think back at some of the memories and to be able to remember some of these things. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Later, of course, I'm sure Taylor will ask you if you have any questions, but what would be also interesting to me is not only just questions, but reminiscences.
Absolutely, yeah. We've purposefully left a little bit of space for that. So thank you so much, Bill. At this point, I would like to introduce Jim Rooney, who for over 60 years has been involved in many phases of the music business, starting out as a performer with banjo-playing partner Bill Keith, a partnership which lasted until Bill's death in 2015. Jim played an important role in the folk revival of the 1960s. He managed the legendary Club 47 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, then became a director of and the talent coordinator for the Newport Folk Festival. He was also tour managed for the Newport Jazz Festival and was the production manager for one of the first New Orleans jazz festivals. In the early 70s, Jim moved to Woodstock, New York, where he managed the Bearsville sound studios for Albert Grossman. In the past 40 years, Jim has worked in Nashville as a musician, songwriter, recording engineer, Grammy-winning record producer, and partner in a successful music publishing company, Forerunner Music. Jim is best known for his record production with Nancy Griffith, John Prine, Iris DeMent, Hal Ketchum, Tom Paxton, Tom Rush, and Peter Rowan. In 2009, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Americana Music Association for his work as an engineer and producer. Recently, Jim was honored by the International Bluegrass Music Association with a Distinguished Achievement Award. He's also written 3 books about music: Bossman, Bill Monroe, and Muddy Waters. I have to tell you, when I was first working on my master's degree and started writing about this music, a professor gave me 2 worn bluegrass history books and said, I think you should read these. One of them was Neil Rosenberg's Bluegrass History, and the other was Bossman. So I still have both of them on my bookshelf. He also wrote Baby, Let Me Follow You Down, the illustrated story of the Cambridge folk years, and most recently, a memoir, In It for the Long Run, a musical odyssey. Let's welcome Jim Rooney.
Well, thank you and good night. Well, I want to, don't have a lot of time here, and I just want to make sure to get in why I got started here. And I'm from Dedham, Massachusetts, which if you're not from Massachusetts, it's not far from here. And I went to a Latin school in West Roxbury, the Roxbury Latin School. And so I was going there. I didn't have any musical background in my family. Tried piano lessons, and that didn't work. Nothing seemed to be happening in that area. And so I was, I guess, around 1950, end of 51, beginning of 52, a buddy of mine in school said, oh, you got to listen to this radio show. It's the funniest thing you've ever heard. It's this thing called the Hayloft Jamboree. It was on WCOP. And so I turned it on. Well, the disc jockey started at 8 o'clock at night, a fellow named Nelson Bragg, the Merry Mayor of Milo, Maine. He was a down east. He didn't pretend to be from the South. He wasn't from the South. He was from Milo, Maine. And he worked that down east thing down as far as he could get it. And it was very funny and very good. And however, I tuned in a few minutes early, and I heard coming out of the radio this music. Man, what is this? And it was the Lilly brothers and Don Stover and Tex Logan. And I'd never heard singing like this or talking like that. Everett Lilly was the host, and banjo playing and fiddle, whatever. And my own thinking about this later on, my own explanation for this is that my Irish genes, which had been slumbering musically, all got jangled and said, this is familiar. This is something that I have heard before in another life or something. I do believe in genetic memory. And so at any rate, there was a funny song on there, Mother's Not Dead, She's Only Sleeping. Well, that's very funny, isn't it? Until you actually think about it. And as Bill said, there was this streak of, we're smart people from the Northeast, and we're not a bunch of hillbillies, and we think this stuff, we're above this stuff. Mothers dying and all of that. What a bunch of smarmy, sentimental stuff. Well, I don't know. I just felt, well, maybe I turned that back on the next night and the next night. And I just couldn't stop listening to the Lilly brothers and Don Stover and Tex Logan. And eventually, maybe, I don't know, the Hayloft Jamboree did a once-a-month show at Symphony Hall. And they would have a star come up from Nashville or wherever. And the first show I saw was Slim Whitman. He was a star. And the Lilly brothers and Stover and Tex, they called themselves the Confederate Mountaineers because they're from the Mountaineer State, West Virginia. And so they were on that show, and along with Eddie Zach and the Dude Ranchers, they were kind of an Armenian Western swing band from Providence, and a guy named Jerry Devine who sang Hank Snow songs, another guy named Al Green who did Eddie Arnold stuff, and like that. They had local acts, and I believe I probably saw Joe Val. He was playing with a band called the Radio Rangers, and but he wasn't featured in any way, and I didn't register Joe. He told me that later on. But at any rate, so I go to that show in Symphony Hall, and then I saw Homer and Jethro. I saw Maybelle Carter and her daughters. And so the Lilly brothers were still on every night from 7:45 to 8. And the station was in Boston, in Copley Square, in the bottom of the New England Mutual Life building, a big building right there in Copley Square. And I had gotten familiar with going into Boston from Dedham to go to a woodworking class in Jamaica Plain on Saturday morning. And I took a bus from the end of my street and then a trolley car from Forest Hills to over to Jamaica Plain. And on the trolley one day I came across a book of passes to a thing called the Laugh Movie, L-A-F-F, of course, Laugh Movie on Washington Street. And after the class, I kept going on the trolley, and I found my way to Washington Street in Boston. And that was the beginning of I was 12 or 13. That was the beginning of my rambles around the middle of Boston. So I knew where this radio station was. So I said to my buddy Dick Curley, who turned me on to this thing in the first place, I said, let's go in there and see them do that radio show. And we did. And you could walk into the station. There was no guard. The door wasn't locked. You just walked in, and it was a big place. In the lobby, they had murals of, like, hillbillies having fun, like Al Cap, Lil Abner was a very popular comic strip at the time. And they had murals on the wall of people in the hills of wherever having fun. And then they had a couple of 3 studios. And we just kept walking. Nobody was there. Nobody said hello, nothing. We just walked in. And we came around a corner, and there they were in a studio through the glass, the Lilly brothers and Don Stover and Tex Logan doing their radio show. It dressed up in their costumes, their Confederate costumes. There's a picture of them here somewhere, right there. That's the first picture in my book, as a matter of fact, my in-long run book. That is the first picture because that's the beginning for me. And so there they were. And we had our noses pressed up against the window. And so they came out, and they were so nice. Hello, boys, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we came to see you. Well, thank you so much. And so, well, we're going, would you like to come with us? We're going over here to play. Okay. And so we walked across Boston Common with them in their Confederate generals' outfits. None of them were dressed as privates, you know. And nobody batted an eye. There was no heckling going on, nothing. And we walked straight across to a bar on the Tremont Street called the Plaza Bar. It was my first time in a honky-tonk. They led me down this road, and I have never turned back. So there we were. And this hard-bitten waitress comes over. What are you boys? And Everett, these are friends. You give them a Coca-Cola. And, of course, they weren't drinking, of course. And she said, You want a cherry in it? We didn't know what these people were talking about. So at any rate, so there we were, and that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. You know, I just can't say enough about the Lilly family. What a wonderful family this was. And I wound up playing with Everett and tennis, Everett's sons in the 70s. And his daughter, Everett's daughter, is playing here today. It's just incredible, wonderful family. So that's how I got started. And the record show at the time was playing Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell and Kitty Wells and Hank Thompson. And eventually I auditioned. A year or so later, I got hands on a guitar. I play backwards and upside down. And I auditioned, went in there on the trolley car with my little plywood guitar. And I auditioned for the guy running the show, Aubrey Mayhew, and he said, he said, "Do you want to be on the radio, kid?" So he put me on the radio, and so I was on the Hayloft Jamboree, but Joe wasn't on it at the time, and the Lilly brothers had gone, they had a change of management, and they weren't playing that show anymore, so I never was on the same show with them. But I was on shows with Elton Britt, the great yodeler. At any rate, so that's how I began. And then in the course of time, I met up with Bill Keith. I wasn't playing bluegrass. I was playing hillbilly music. I wanted to be Hank Williams at the time. And that's what I was, or Hank Snow. I played Hank Williams and Hank Snow songs, and that's how I got on the radio. But I never played bluegrass. And then I met Bill Keith at Amherst College. And he was just learning how to play the Scruggs style. This is 1959. And so I said, well, I know this banjo player. You got to hear it. Bill had never heard a banjo player play this style in person. He had Earl Scruggs' record, and he was quite good at copying that. And I said, well, you got to hear this banjo player, Don Stover. He's in Boston every night of the week. And so when we went home on Easter vacation in 1959, I took him to the Hillbilly Ranch. And that was the first of many visits. And later on took Peter Rowan. And just their influence on us was incredible. And then, we met Joe Val. Bill and I started to play, and just the two of us, with Fritz Richmond playing washed-up bass. And Joe Val and Herb Applin came to see us at a little concert at a church in Boston. And we started talking. And I said, well, we play at this coffee house in Cambridge once a week. And, we rehearse at our house. Why don't you come over? So Herb and Joe came over, and right away, all of a sudden, we had a bluegrass band with Joe Val. And that's how we got started. And 8 months later, we recorded an album. That was the first time Joe got recorded. And Joe had never played in a place like the Club 47 before, where it wasn't a lot of people, it wasn't maybe 20, 30 people, but they were listening actually. And they loved him immediately loved him, and they never heard anything like it. And that was his beginning, really. He'd been playing a long time, but that was really his beginning. And so it was an extremely exciting time for all of us. And within another year, Bill Keith was playing with Bill Monroe. You can't make this stuff up, really. Well, that's probably enough time. We won't have any time for questions if we keep going.
Thank you so much. This has been just So wonderful. Thank you, all three of you. At this point, we are going to open things up, both for questions for the panelists, but also if folks have similar anecdotes from the history of bluegrass in this area, we welcome that. Please try and keep your comments and questions to just a couple of minutes so we have time for everyone, but we're really looking forward to hearing from all of you. So if you could introduce yourselves and then either ask your questions or tell us a little something.
Taylor, could I steal like 20 seconds?
Of course, you can.
In addition to the folks that were there, part of my research also, I want to find out who the record stores were, who those early promoters were, who those early DJs were, the radio stations, the TV shows, all of those different pieces that built the history of bluegrass music, not just the musicians, but all of those factors. If you have any account of that, please feel free and share those with me as well. Thank you.
I'll add also that Ken and I used to go to the Hillbilly Ranch fairly often, maybe once a month or so, and we were underage. 21 was the drinking age back then, but you could just have a ginger ale, and they were fine. Hillbilly Tex was the waiter, and he'd come by and give you a ginger ale if you wanted it. Very welcoming.
Yeah.
I was just curious about the Hillbilly Ranch, and when did it begin, and when did you guys go there, and how long did it last?
I have no idea when it began. The reason, I think one of the main reasons, there were about half a dozen bars that featured this kind of music in around the early 50s there. And I think the big reason was the Charlestown Navy Yard. All these kids from the South, join the Navy and see the world was the motto. Well, they were seeing the world all right. It was downtown Boston, in pretty rough bars. There was the night my brother graduated from Harvard in 1953, we went to the Mohawk Ranch, which was on Columbus and Dartmouth Street, to hear the Lilly brothers and Don Stover and Tex. I believe Tex was still with them at that time. And at any rate, there was Robert's Western Playhouse. There was half a dozen bars like this around Boston. And the Hillbilly Ranch lasted way far beyond all the rest. And I think partly because it became a place that was known, for this music. People would start coming there to see, the Lilly brothers played there for 18 years. That was a long time. But as Everett said, it beat working in the mines. It really did. And so, and they raised their families. They were able to raise their families here and have a life, And so, but I can't, it burned. There was a fire. And I think Peter Owen has a picture of it that he's putting in his book. And that was probably in the 70s, I guess, maybe, or maybe even the 80s. Must have been the 80s, yeah.
I was visiting about this very question with Fred Bartenstein, who's another really important person in this music and studying its history, and he said, both the sailors and also the truckers. The highway ends in Boston, and so having a place where Southern folks from, that ended up in those two businesses, had a place to listen to music here, and Hillbilly Ranch was a huge part of it. He mentioned he was one of the first people to tell me about being a college student just scared out of his wits going to the Hillbilly Ranch, but everything I've heard, folks were, at least the people working there and the musicians, were pretty welcoming to everybody.
Fred was actually from Ohio, but had his hands in the early establishment of bluegrass organizations here in Boston. And wonderful book he put out called Industrial Strength Bluegrass. So if you're into reading about the history of bluegrass music, tremendous book. I'd recommend it.
He claims he chose to go to Harvard because of the bluegrass scene here. Other questions or comments?
As a kid, one of my favorite things to do on Sunday morning was listen to Car Talk. Of course, that iconic opening music. Can you guys talk a little bit about the involvement of the Matthias brothers in the local scene? I'm just curious how involved they were, or I don't.
I mentioned Raymond before. and because he was one of the signers of the that first press release, essentially, that BBU put out. He and his brother Tom, and they used bluegrass music to feature, open their show. Their sister Lucille, I don't know if she's even here today. She helped with some of the reminiscences as well. They're both Raymond and Lucille are still around and still active. And I was able to talk to them for some of this history here.
She's been a promoter too, promoter and agent. Agent for a while.
And Mike Melford, who is also one of those, Mike is a lawyer and a mandolin player, and I met Mike originally through his bluegrass, and he also produced some great records, John Hartford Grammy-winning albums, and Mike was the lawyer for Click and Clack, and they were always being sued.
It was only a few years ago, they had an office in Harvard Square, and painted on the window, you could see the third floor window, I think it was Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. And it's only been about 3 years ago that window got replaced.
Hi, my name is Dudley Connell, and we started one of the first tours outside of Washington, D.C. that the Johnson Mountain Boys ever did was to the church in Cambridge, and it was BBU who produced it. And Joe Val came to that show. And I remember him telling me, because at the time I was probably about 20, and everything I sang was just full throat, just as hard as I could go. And Joe gave me some advice that I think probably saved my career or my voice. He said, and he had this, this great New England accent, and he's like, Dudley, you need to work on your falsetto. You're going to blow your voice out. If you last a decade singing like you're singing, you're over. You're going to be done. So in a sense, I think Joe was kind of a mentor to me because he taught me that and probably saved my voice for a while. And who was telling the story about Joe Val going to Bean Blossom? Was that you, Jim? Yeah.
That's me, yeah.
Well,
That was big for Joe, but Bill Monroe said you use the New England Bluegrass Boys.
right.
He let them, and Joe felt that was his permission from Bill Monroe to be Joe Val of the New England Bluegrass.
Yeah. Well, for us to come to Boston was much like Joe Val going to Bean Blossom. I mean, Washington, D.C. is a cosmopolitan town, but there's a lot of Southerners in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. that were part of the Great Migration looking for factory work. Yeah. And so for us to come to Boston, being from Washington, D.C., and to be accepted was a really, really big deal. And because of Bill and Ken and Marion and Rounder Records, we were up here a lot. And I think the New England bluegrass scene really made our career and gave us the confidence to travel into the South, where in the South we were Northerners. In Boston, we were Southerners.
Right.
We were the awkward child, is what we were. But anyway, thank you for letting me share.
Thank you so much.
Dudley, there's a book on bluegrass in Baltimore by an author named Tim Newby, N-E-W-B-Y. You might want to look that up.
I will, and I have one more thing.
Please.
I want to thank Jim Rooney, because your book, Boss Men, was one of the things that got me. I was already really into the music, but your book kind of led me into studying the culture of where these guys came from and why they were important. Where did they work? Where did they go grocery shopping? What was their lives like? Their church life, their religious, their faith. And thank you. That's one of the most important books in bluegrass I've ever read for myself.
Amen.
Well, what's important about that book, which I still think is very important, is their words. It's them talking, not me. It's not about me. I strung it together and was lucky enough to get them both where they would be wanting to talk about what they did musically and not about their private life or this, that, and the other thing. I really wanted them to focus on, I thought of them both as band leaders, how they had come from a rural background to make their music commercially viable. Bill Monroe was very aware of himself as a professional entertainer and singer, and so was Muddy Waters. When they went on a stage, they looked good and they behaved in a certain way, and people were paying money to see them, and they were and those people worked hard for their money, and they knew that. And so they didn't cheat their audience. They treated their audience with great respect and their music with great respect. And I think that's what distinguished both of them. And so I'm happy about that. That their words, if you read those, I read them aloud sometimes. I do a radio show. And if I play one of their songs and they have something they've said about that, I read it, and when you read their voices just come through the way they talk, and it's really strong, and it's terrific. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments? We specifically left time for folks to be able to visit. So
I was introduced to bluegrass in 1974 in Newton, Mass. And I was wondering if any of you knew the history behind so many people in Newton being interested in bluegrass. Does anyone know?
Jerry Katz, I believe, lived in Newton at the time.
I was in bluegrass at the time.
Okay.
Okay, thank
This
you.
is a great question, though, and worth thinking about it, because, we often talk about Boston in terms of this history, but all the little hubs, even it's not Newton, but not too far, Waltham is really important in this music, and Waltham is not the same place as Boston. It has a different culture, it has a different community. I think about that a lot, and somebody ought to have an answer to your question, because it is a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wasn't the Joe Val Festival for a while at Newton North High School? That's just the location, the relationship, but I live in Newton, so I was aware of that.
So this history is all fairly new to me, as is the whole bluegrass scene around here. But I'm curious, if we wanted to read more about your work, like those interviews, I'm fascinated. Where could we learn that?
What I would say is, in terms of being established authors, there's a pretty big divide right there. But in terms of people that are working really hard to fill that gap, we're right here. So I am published in a few different academic journals on other music scenes. So I've written a lot about local music scenes in various contexts. So I have an article out about the history of music in northwestern Montana. It's a similar thing where southern migrants ended up there being loggers, building national parks, things like that directly after World War II. I am hoping to get the kind of summary article about this that I drew from for my introduction out. It probably in the next year. Academic publications take a little while. What are you thinking in terms of the trajectory of your book? It's a sprawling project.
It is, and I've kicked around the idea of do I do it by state? Do I do it by the different factors? And that's really still out there. I want to pick the brain of Bill and Jim, who have been down this road before, and get their advice. And there's been some folks that had an idea about how they were going to write a book. Safford wrote this really great book about Tony Rice, and the way that book rolled out wasn't what his original idea was. So publishers have a lot to say about that, and editors. So I'm not really sure yet. Right now, it's a matter of collecting all the information, which I think is priority number one, and then from there we'll see what happens. But probably short articles that would then probably build up to a full length.
I would add 3 actually. So Bill's Rounder Records book is really important in terms of this history. Jim's Baby Let Me Follow You Down is, I would consider probably the definitive text at this point about that includes this history. It goes beyond just bluegrass. And another really closely related book that's very good is called Yankee Twang. It's country and western music in New England, and that's by Clifford R. Murphy. Jerry, you look like you have a thought.
Thank you so much, guys, for this insightful session. As you know, as I mentioned earlier, I've been on a mission to collect the BBU archives and get them online for scholarly research, but also it's a heck of a lot of fun just to page through old flyers. We actually have stuff online that goes back to the first BBU show, the incorporation papers. We also have the newsletters that accompanied the mailings. Of course, back in the day, the only way to get people out to an audience, to the shows, was to reach them by snail mail and send postcards and flyers. And we have the newsletters that accompanied the shows, which introduced bands like the Johnson Mountain Boys and Earl Taylor and all these great bands that people knew nothing about. We were the gateway to introducing these bands. Take a look at the archives. If you go to bbu.org and go to About BBU, there's an archive section. If you see something you have that we don't have, please reach out to us, reach out to Taylor or any of these people on the panel and share that, because we want to collect that, document that, and make it available to people for research and for the history. This is a vital time right now. We're all not young people, and as we get older, sometimes that stuff disappears, and we want to capture it while we have a chance. And at the same time, if you have recordings of these artists, whether it be a national band or a local gathering of people, there's the opportunity to archive those and make those available. It's a living, breathing music, and we want to collect those stories. So reach out to myself, anybody here, anybody on the BBU board, and we can work with you to try and get that stuff archived.
Thank you so much. At this point, I want to wrap up by thanking each of the panelists so much. Alex, Jim, and Bill, it's been a pleasure getting to hear all of your stories. We'll all be around and would love to visit with you more. But I do really want to take a moment and specifically, once again, thank the BBU and Jerry Katz. Without Jerry, none of this would happen in quite a big way. Probably I should be saying none of this. So thank you all for being here. Enjoy the music this week.